Mark, you're unusual here in that you're actually not a lawyer, I believe. Perhaps you could tell me a bit more about your role and what kind of things you're working on.
Sure, happy to. So yeah, I am in fact not a lawyer. My career has been in crisis communications and public affairs. But what we've done at Hogan Lovells, which is unique, is to totally integrate that function with legal and regulatory counsel. And that's because lawyers and regulators have, regulatory attorneys have deep substantive knowledge of the law, and particularly what the regulatory bodies that are stakeholders in any crisis need to get out of a resolution of the crisis. So working hand in glove with attorneys is part of the vision of what Hogan Lovells is bringing to the table.
So what kind of advice do you think a company needs? What would you give them when they're facing a brand crisis?
Well, I think first of all, nobody really knows exactly what to do before the crisis hits, because by definition, it's a crisis. And it's not something that you do every single day. So what you really need to do is fall back on a methodology of knowing how you're going to approach a situation. So I think to really have an ordered response to any crisis, there are 5 basic principles that come into play. First, it's to disclose the facts. Attorneys are very good at gathering the facts. They want to know all of them, but they tend to have an instinct to then guard them, to hold them close and not share them. And in a crisis, that's really detrimental to the communications team. The communications team is handicapped by not having the facts all disclosed to them under privilege. So the first thing to do is to have the legal team and the communications team work together, understanding all the facts, then to share them. And it's somewhat counterintuitive because people don't like to air their dirty laundry. And we have a natural instinct, when something has gone wrong, to hide or deny that we're the responsible party. So a key to really getting to moving beyond is to be honest and straightforward with your customers about exactly what happened and what you're going to do about it.
A company might say, well, the facts are actually very complex and we can't give a simple message. What do you do in that case?
Simplicity is an art, and making the complex comprehensible is why you need a legal team working together with a communications team. Human beings don't really respond to just statements of fact. You've got to really make them feel like you care, like you're sincere, and that you have their best interests in mind. And so to do that, you have to use human and emotional language. So that is part of the art of communications. I would say the third really important thing is to get your story out there. When we have a crisis, the natural instinct really is to dread actually talking to the media and avoid it at all costs. And by the time you eventually do get out there and talk about the facts, the story is often largely written. And many attorneys, many companies find that when they are responding to the media at that point, they're being asked for one quote in a story that's already largely been written, and it makes the company look either defensive or pathetic. And so part of the art really is be the first to tell your story. It'll be the seminal story from which all other stories are later written. And it's a technique. Be brave, leak your own story, go on background if you need to to, if you don't know yet what you're going to tell your audience, you can always speak to reporters on background, and they'll appreciate your forthrightness, and ultimately you'll be rewarded for that.
Can you give us any good or bad examples of what you've been talking about?
Well, there are plenty of examples of both, and I don't like to be critical, particularly when you're Monday morning quarterbacking, and you can see in hindsight how things should have gone. But there's one example in particular that I think is very instructive. Last year, United Airlines had a famous disaster, and they've had a few since then. But what is really remarkable about that story of how United treated the Dr. David Dow passenger disembarkment is how much United actually did really, really superbly. They did so much right. And yet they own the 2017 PR disaster of the year. And so, what I think you can learn from that is that what you need is a coordinated team where all the stakeholders are at the table, everyone's read into the facts, and you coordinate the response. Unique aspects of where United actually made some missteps were in the very initial hours, where they listened and were true to their core brand values in some areas, protecting employees, making sure the CEO communicated that he stood behind his employees, but failed with other stakeholders, namely consumers, and showing compassion and care for consumers. So I think we can learn a lot from that, and I've actually written a bit about that, and we'll be speaking about that today.
And now we live in a globalized world, and technology makes everything move very fast. Does that make it harder or easier to deal with a brand crisis?
I think the speed of life has accelerated for everyone. And so in a lot of ways, yes, it increases the challenge, it increases the need for speed, but it also means that news cycles move on too. And so it can be your friend if you're athletically prepared to respond.